Our second lesson this morning is from the Gospel of Luke, the 19th chapter, beginning at the first verse, a story of an encounter between Jesus and a man named Zacchaeus. Listen now to God's word. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and very rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. And all who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came out to seek and to save the lost." This is the word of the Lord. Several weeks ago, I received an email from a member of the congregation who said that we had made a mistake in announcing the series sermons on the 9 fruit of the Spirit. Well, knowing how it had been advertised everywhere and publicized, I thought to myself, oops, again? What did I do this time? I hope we didn't mess things up too badly. Well, he said that instead of goodness, we'd listed the 6th fruit of the Spirit as generosity. Well, if you learned the names of the fruits of the Spirit as a child, you probably learned them as peace, love, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Goodness. But yet, in our Pew Bible and NRSVP, that 6th gift is translated generosity. Well, is it goodness or is it generosity? The root of the word that Paul uses is core meaning is good. But good is a word that has so many different dimensions. We can talk about good tasting food, and I'm all for that. We can talk about a good painting, a couple that's a good fit for one another. We can talk about something that's well done, something that is suitable, something that is beautiful or pleasing in an aesthetic sense. But when we talk about goodness as the fruit of the Spirit, we're speaking primarily in moral or theological languages. Something is good because it is created by God, blessed by God, filled with the goodness of God. You know, Jesus said that God alone is good. Why do you call me good? And he's simply pointing to the fact that it is the very being of God that is the definition of goodness. All goodness flows from God. You remember the creation story? And every day it was pronounced that it was good. And then when the human creature is created, we hear the divine voice say, "It was very good." All goodness flows from God. Something is good because it is rightly ordered and it fills God's purposes. To be good is to be like the one who created all things. Now, when we talk about goodness, we immediately think about moral perfection. But I want to give you an example to let you know that it's really not so much about moral perfection and all of our human striving as it is about living in a right relationship with God and letting God's goodness flow through us. We heard the choir sing the last words of David, that a king must deal justly, must rule justly. Well, what does that look like? It looks like goodness and generosity. We all know that David was far from perfect. Oh no, but he trusts in the goodness of God, and throughout his long reign, he finds the goodness of God flowing through his life to others. For a good heart is a generous heart. Goodness is not some kind of static quality, but it's like that living water in us that overflows and becomes a spring of life for others. The prophet Samuel says that God rejects Saul because he turned from God, and David is chosen because he's a man after God's own heart. We all know the story about how David and Saul's son Jonathan are intimate friends, soulmates, we might say. And David promises Jonathan that if anything should happen to Jonathan, he will look after his household, his family. Well, Saul and Jonathan die in battle, and when all the dust settles, David asks, "Is there anyone left in Jonathan's household?" "Yes, Lord, there is one son who is handicapped. He is lame, Mephibosheth." And David invites Mephibosheth to come into the royal house and to eat at the king's table. And he restores to Mephibosheth all of Saul's goods and all of Saul's lands. Out of a good and generous heart, he gives back to the grandson of his enemy. And so our Pew Bible has it as generosity. It is the fruit of a transformed heart. One day Jesus goes to Jericho, and there is the man Zacchaeus, a man despised by all, dressed in his fine robes, walking through the town and thinking something of himself, and everybody in town wants to spit on him. Detested and scorned as a tax collector, a collaborator with the Romans, and not only a tax collector, but the chief tax collector and very rich. Luke suggests that he has his wealth by unjustly gains, extorting money from the people. And when Luke says that Zacchaeus is a man of short stature, we assume he's talking about far more than his height. He's talking about the small spirit, the little heart that is within him. Yet something moves within the being of Zacchaeus, the Spirit of God, and it leads Zacchaeus to want to see Jesus more than anything else, and forgetting all concern about how foolish he will look in the eyes of the others, he scampers up that sycamore tree in his gorgeous robes in order to be able to see Jesus as he passes by. And Jesus looks up at Zacchaeus and says, "Come down. Today I will stay in your house." You know, when Jesus enters the home or the heart of a sinner, something changes. The outcast is a restored child of Abraham, a part of the family of faith. Like the Grinch, you know, the one who stole Christmas, how his heart grew 3 times in one day. Zacchaeus' heart is enlarged by the goodness of God and overflows in a spirit of generosity. And Zacchaeus declares to Jesus, "Look, half of my possessions I will give away. And if I have defrauded anyone, I will return fourfold what I have taken." A good and generous heart. In the book, The Paradox of Generosity, Giving We Receive and Grasping We Lose, 2 researchers studied the impact of generosity on the quality of life. They found a few interesting things. They found that people who give their resources joyfully and freely, people who volunteer their time, people who stay emotionally and relationally connected to others, people who care for their neighbors and act with kindness, people who understand the importance of giving generously. These people live, they discovered, far more healthy, abundant, and purposeful, happy lives. And so the authors claim that generosity itself is not a means to an end, but it is within itself a mindset, a way of being in the world that is good and to be desired. For a generous spirit is open to the world. A generous spirit lives not out of fear, but out of the goodness of God. A generous spirit opens its arms to meet the needs of others with the goodness of God. That's what Paul understands in his writing to the Corinthians. A cantankerous group of people. And yet he wants this group of people to join with him and join with the churches in Macedonia in providing an offering of relief to the saints in Jerusalem who are undergoing a time of serious affliction and famine. He reminds them of the goodness and the generosity of God, who provides every blessing in abundance, who scatters abroad, who gives to the poor. For it is God's generosity, God's goodness of soul, that inspires our own acts of generosity. And the fruit, Paul says, of joining with the churches of Macedonia and providing relief for the saints and giving generously of that which God has given to us will produce not only relief for them, but will produce an abundant harvest of faith and thanksgiving. But we understand that when we know about how much joy we receive, not so much by what we spend, but by what we give away. And this is why we emphasize the language of generosity when we talk about making a pledge, a commitment to Christ and to the work of Christ's church. Yes, generous givers enable us to fulfill our mission for Christ, to worship and glorify God, to nurture our children and youth, to care for one another, to reach out to a world in crisis with the love of Jesus. All these things, but more than that. The practice of generosity transforms and enlarges our hearts and leads us to live a more abundant life for God in the world. Now, some people think, well, I have so little to give. My gift won't matter. It doesn't make any difference. Why should I make a pledge or a commitment? I say this: it is all about proportional giving. Give as God has blessed you. Every gift matters, and it matters for another important reason. Because making a commitment, and I pray that every household in this congregation would make a commitment to the work of Christ in the coming year. Why? Not only because it'll allow our officers to be better stewards of all of our gifts shared together, but because it will change our hearts. It is a practice of spiritual discipline that enlarges and increases the goodness and the grace of God in us. It allows us to let go of our fears, our need to grasp, and to open our arms to God and to the world in love. One Sunday afternoon when I was in elementary school, I remember how visitors from the church came to talk with our family about our commitment to Christ and to the work of Christ's church. I don't remember a thing they said. I don't even remember who they were, but I do remember how our parents and all 5 of us rowdy kids were sitting together in the living room listening. And then we were led to actually fill out our own pledge cards. Not only our parents, but we as children, each one of us filled out a commitment card to the work of the church. I remember this clearly. But I don't remember whether it was 25 cents or 50 cents or $1 a week. But the memory of making that commitment has stayed with me to this day. For the experience of making a commitment and discovering the joy of giving to others is what has remained with me to this day. I suspect that many of you have similar memories, experiences. I know that in themselves they seem very insignificant. And yet it is such memories as these that have the power to shape a lifetime of generosity. So is it goodness? Is it generosity? It is the goodness of God in us that overflows into an abundance of generosity. Amen.